This is the operating theatre at the Royal Prince Alfred Hospital in Sydney. There is no operating table in use today because this is a controlled enactment of an emergency that leaves no time to summon the technical resources of modern medicine. This patient is about to be drowned. This experiment is one of a series being carried out for the first time in Australia. Its aim is to discover the most efficient method of artificial respiration. It begins with a general anesthetic. When the patient is unconscious, a needle is placed in his arm, ready to receive a dose of curare. This is the drug originally used by South American Indians to tip the darts in their blowpipes. It has the effect of paralyzing the muscles and is used in surgery to obtain muscular relaxation. Its effect on this patient will be to cause his breathing to stop completely. Physiologically, he will be like a man drowned or asphyxiated. First, however, a mask is fitted closely to the patient's face. This is part of the machine in the background, a spirometer. This machine measures to a fraction of a cubic centimetre the amount of air passing through it. The mask is connected by tubes to the spirometer. The slightest exchange of air in the lungs is now reflected by movement of the air bell on the machine and recorded by the needle on the drum. The first part of the experiment demonstrates the importance of the position of the head in keeping the air passages clear. With the chin held up, breathing is normal. If the chin drops into the relaxed position, all movement of air stops. Lift the chin and breathing starts again. Now the curare. The dose given to the patient is calculated according to his weight. It begins to take effect almost immediately. Gradually, his breathing becomes shallower. Soon, it will stop altogether. The patient is no longer breathing. He will die within 3 or 4 minutes if he does not receive oxygen. So now he must be kept alive by artificial respiration until the effects of the curare wear off. The first method used is the Holga Neilson, which has been relied upon in drowning cases for the past 10 years. Provided the patient's head is in the right position, the Holga Neilson pumps an adequate supply of air into the lungs. The hip lift method also moves a good quantity of air in and out of the lungs, as long as the patient's head is not allowed to fall sideways. Finally, the patient is given the Sylvester method of respiration. This again provides good movement of air, and the patient's head can be steadied against the knees. This patient has now been kept alive for nearly an hour by different methods of artificial respiration. Now the record of the experiment is unwound from the spirometer and the patient's mask is removed. Now everything is ready for a demonstration by Dr. Bruce Clifton of a method of revival thousands of years old, but one that has been strangely neglected.
This is what I regard as the most efficient form of mouth-to-mouth artificial respiration. With the left hand, you put a finger over the lower teeth, the thumb of the left hand over the lower teeth, and grip hold of the lower jaw. And when you've got a firm grip of it, you pull it forwards off the back of the pharynx. Pull it forwards. And then, with the fingers of the right hand, you occlude the nostrils. Then lean forward with the mouth very wide open to cover the victim's mouth and your own thumb and just blow. There's very little resistance at all. Now, if you don't hold the jaw forward and you let the jaw fall back, you tend to get obstruction. And noisy respiration. Pull the jaw forward again. A satisfactory rate is between 10 and 15 a minute.
Now, Doctor, why is it so necessary to hold his jaw and head up?
Well, if you don't hold the head extended and the jaw up, you tend to get respiratory obstruction in the upper part of the air passages. And of course, the minute you get that obstruction, when you blow, the air can't go down. And often goes another way, it is forced down into the stomach.
Now, is it necessary to hold the tongue down when you are doing this mouth-to-mouth method?
No, there's no necessity to do anything with the tongue. You just grip hold of the lower jaw and pull it forwards.
Now, Doctor, how can you tell if an ordinary person was doing this mouth-to-mouth method, how could they tell if it was having beneficial effect?
Well, you can watch when you're doing it, the expansion of the chest, and you feel as if you're just blowing up a balloon. It's very easy to blow. There's no resistance whatsoever. And as you blow, the chest elevates, and when you stop blowing, the chest falls, and there's no noise attached to it. There's no rattling in the airway.
Dr. Clifton now demonstrates a refinement of this method using a device developed by Sapphire, an American doctor.
Now, this is a resuscit tube that was been used a lot in America. Now, with this, again, it's very important to get an airtight contact with the lips. I've inserted this airway into the mouth over the tongue, and I've occluded the lips with the flange on the tube, and now I just blow down. Notice when I blow down now that there's nothing going into the chest. It's all coming out to the nose. So at the same time, you've got to block the nose. Release the nose again, and you'll notice that there's less effective expansion. Block the nose.
Apart from the convenience of using the tube, what other advantages does it have over direct contact?
Well, using really no advantages, except that it's more aesthetic. Some people don't like the idea of actually placing their mouth wide open, a patient that's drowned with a lot of seaweed and stuff around their face, and I think from the point of view of attractiveness generally it would be more effective. But it is easier, I think, to get a fairly airtight contact.
What about in mouth to mouth? Do you get any leakages there?
No, not if you do it properly, but I think it's easier with this method to ensure that it is fairly airtight. It's not much easier, just slightly.
Is there any risk of a layman causing any damage to the inside of the patient's throat or mouth with its tube?
I think tubes made of rubber and made of plastic, it would be unlikely to cause a great deal of serious damage. You could cause a small scratch on the throat, but nothing to worry about.
Now the patient's ordeal is nearly over. The effect of the curare is wearing off and he sleeps quietly. His anonymous part in this experiment may help save some of the 300 people who now drown every year in Australia.
Doctor, could you just briefly summarize your findings on these experiments?
Well, this morning we tried to demonstrate what has been demonstrated in other parts of the world, that one of the crucial things about resuscitation by artificial respiration is the patency of the air passages. And we've demonstrated during 3 manual types of artificial respiration, Holga Neilson, hip lift and Sylvester's method, that the airway position can very quickly become obstructed unless it's held by a second attendant. If the airway is held unobstructed by all those methods, you usually get a very good gaseous exchange. As the other type of artificial respiration today, we actually used air insufflation. We actually blew down the patient's mouth. It can also be done by blowing through their nose, and by this means we had very adequate expansion of the chest. And from the point of view of ease of management, being able to do it for a long time, my own feeling is that mouth-to-mouth respiration is a very adequate form of respiration. Whether or not it will be adequate to drain the lungs in a case of a drowned person, I can't answer that. But from the point of view of actually getting oxygen into the lungs and carbon dioxide out of the lungs, there's no doubt it is the easiest and the most efficient method we've used this morning.
Now, how long would it take to revive a person partially drowned by using this method?
That's a very difficult question to ask. It depends what you mean by drowning. There are various stages of drowning. If a patient that has drowned or has been rescued from the water is breathing at the time of rescue, I still presume that you regard them as being drowned if they're in a state of shock. If they're still breathing, there's no need for artificial respiration. If they're rescued from the water and they're not breathing, well, then the chances of recovery become very, very much less. And the only way of getting over that is to get oxygen as quickly as you can into the lungs. And if you do that, within 3 or 4 minutes of them having stopped breathing, they should recover. But if the time exceeds that 3 or 4 minutes, then the patient is liable to die.
And now a word from one of the onlookers at today's experiment. Judge Pryor, what's your interest here?
Well, I'm president of the Royal Lifesaving Society, and we're very vitally interested in the international convention which is being held next month. It's one of the objects of the convention to establish which is the best method of artificial respiration to be used in cases of drowning, from electric shock, gas poisoning and other causes.
And Judge, has this method of artificial resuscitation met with any opposition from any of your members?
Well, we have some doubting Thomases, of course, but with anything new, it's necessary to experiment and to establish that the method is successful before we can recommend it for use to all our members.
Whereabouts did you get your volunteers from, Judge?
Well, most of them were members of the Royal Lifesaving Society, and there were quite a number who volunteered from the general public.